Hello again and welcome to another Warhammer 40k Mordian Glory video. In today's episode, we are going to be doing another unit review, this time taking a look at the Guard's most iconic artillery piece, the mighty Basilisk. Now, just in case you've not seen one of these videos before, what I like to do is start off with a unit overview, going through the stat line, war gear, and abilities of the unit in question. We then move on to the fine detail, the deep dive, going through the pros and cons of the Basilisk. After that, we will wrap the video up with some final thoughts and a score out of 10. But with all that said, let's not mess around. Let's crack on with today's video. Let's shatter the enemy's sky and dive right into this. Let's begin with that unit overview. The Basilisk is a heavy support choice. That means you're going to find it in the same place in your codex as your Leman Russ and your Rogal Dawns, your typical fire support units. It costs 140 points, and for that princely sum, you get a single Basilisk. This unit does not come in squads like the Field Ordnance Battery, and importantly, unlike the Leman Russ, the Basilisk cannot be taken in squadrons. That means you can only ever take one per heavy support slot. As for its stat line, the Basilisk has a starting movement of 10, a weapon skill of 6+, a ballistic skill of 4+, strength 6, toughness 7, 11 wounds, 3 attacks, leap 7, and a 3+ save. A pretty typical stat line for your 9th edition Chimera chassis vehicles. As standard, the Basilisk is equipped with an Earthshaker cannon and comes with a heavy flamer. Now, you cannot swap that Earthshaker cannon out for anything else. It only has the one main gun option, but you can replace that heavy flamer for a heavy bolter. In addition, you can equip the Basilisk with a dozer blade and a hunter killer missile and armored tracks if you want to. They're pretty standard upgrades for most guard vehicles. Little side note here, but out of all of those different little choices you've got, I wouldn't bother with any of the extra upgrades like the dozer blade and so forth, but I would actually keep the heavy flamer. A lot of people prefer heavy bolters on their Basilisk because they think it just feels right, but for my battlefield experience, I found the heavy flamer to be much more useful. You tend to have your Basilisk hiding, shooting indirect fire with that main gun, and we'll get into the Earthshaker cannon in just a moment. But what that means is it typically never gets to shoot the Basilisk. But one favorite trick that opponents often like to do with their units is to try and stop your Basilisk from firing, tying it up in combat. Having a flamer to deter any little scraplets from charging you and wrapping your Basilisk up with, let's say, like a grot or a couple of termagants is brilliant. And it also means that when you're in combat, you can try and flame the enemy off your hull, freeing up that main gun to still potentially shoot in the same turn. But let's move on from these scraplets and take a look at the main star of the show, which is that Earthshaker cannon. Now, it boasts a 240-inch range. That's just crazy. As far as I'm aware, it is the longest range gun in Warhammer 40k. If you know of a longer range one, let me know down in that comment section. It also fires D6 plus 3 shots, giving it a pretty reliable number of shots that it's firing. Slight advantage over that Field Ordnance Battery. It's strength 10, AP minus 3, and 2 damage. This makes it very punchy, meaning that even against enemy vehicles, it'll be able to reliably wound anything, including knights on 3s, and pretty much any infantry. Anything that's toughness, even heavy infantry like toughness 5, you're going to be wounding them on 2s. AP3, of course, fantastic, means you're going to be smashing through enemy armor saves, putting them down to 5 up, 6 up, and more than likely pushing any real high value targets onto an invulnerable save. Damage 2, a little bit lower than I'd like. Typically, I'd want to see damage 3, but damage 2 still means that every fail save is going to squash the Space Marine, which is not something that you can really turn your nose up at. Of course, the weapon has blast, which isn't all that helpful unless you're firing it against a big 11-man or greater squad, because it's already got the +3 from the heavy D6 plus 3 shots. But the main thing this thing is bringing to the table, the big tamale, is the fact that it has indirect fire. This thing can shoot at targets it cannot see. There is no hiding from the mighty Basilisk and its Earthshaker cannon. In terms of abilities, the Basilisk doesn't really have anything special. It's got regimental tactics, so it gets regimental doctrines, and it can explode. And if it does, then it does D3 mortal wounds, fairly standard for a vehicle of its size. In terms of keywords, it has artillery and it's also got squadron. That means that it will be able to benefit from your Master of Ordnance, giving it reroll 1s, and it can also receive tank orders as well. Now that covers the unit overview of the Basilisk, and on paper this thing doesn't look too bad, but let's get into the fine detail, the nitty gritty. Let's lift up the rock, look at all the insects underneath. Let's begin this part of the video on a positive note. Let's take a look at the good, because bit of foreshadowing here, guys. It's going to go downhill pretty quickly. One of the big things the Basilisk has is a reliable number of shots. It's one of the main things that actually separates it from other popular artillery choices, such as field ordnance batteries with bombast field guns and mortars. All of those weapons have got D6 shots. And yeah, they bring a lot of D6 to the table, so you can kind of mitigate it. But there's always that chance with your mortar teams, you're just going to roll 3 1s. And that's them not doing anything for a turn. There's always that chance with your fob, you're going to roll snake eyes. That's them not doing anything for a turn. But the Basilisk, even if you roll a 1, it's still going to put out a minimum of 4 shots. So it's pretty reliable in terms of its damage output each turn. It's also pretty punchy. It is the highest strength and AP artillery in our codex, meaning that it really does smack when it can land a shot. Most importantly, they're a damn iconic unit. They look damn good on the tabletop. You get 2 or 3 of these things together on a board, you have those barrels pointing in the sky, it's gonna stir the soul of any Emperor-loving guardsman. Even when they're not very good. A lot of Guard players can't help but buy one of these things purely because of aesthetic reasons. Unfortunately, that is where the good news ends. And we now have to get into the bad of the Basilisk. Firstly, it is somewhat fragile. As far as Guard vehicles go, it is no main battle tank. If you try and use this thing as an assault gun, you are going to find it reduced to a burning wreck in short order. Toughness 7 with a 3+ save really doesn't get you very far in 40k these days. So you need to keep it secret and keep it safe. It needs to be firing indirectly or it's going to get picked up in a matter of moments. It's also pretty expensive. It's 140 points. Considering that a Lehman Russ is only 15 points more than this thing and is going to come with better strength, better toughness, better wounds, better attacks, better save, and arguably a better gun, it really does make it somewhat difficult to justify including a Basilisk in your list. On top of all this, the Basilisk is not core. This means it won't benefit from any reroll 1 auras, either from your Castellans or your command squads. So the only way this thing gets reroll 1s is via a Massive Ordnance, which is alright, but it's 25 more points you're going to have to stack onto a Basilisk to make it do its job. And on top of that, you could go for some tank orders, but you don't really want a tank commander sitting back giving orders to your Basilisk. Your tank commanders want to be with your Lehman Russes on the front lines, pushing forward, smashing the enemy with that direct fire. So however you slice it, the Basilisk is kind of struggling to get those rerolls into its life. But the really big one, the entire herd of elephants in the room, is the Basilisk is utterly crippled by the indirect fire nerf. For those of you that don't know, the indirect fire nerf is something that was introduced partway through 9th edition, which basically said if you have indirect fire, if you can shoot units that you can't see, then you suffer -1 to your ballistic skill and the enemy gets +1 to their save. Now, this does stack with being in cover. So the enemy in cover would get +2 to the save if you're shooting at them with indirect fire. But also, it stacks with -1 to hit modifiers. Because the indirect fire nerf very specifically says you modify your ballistic skill by 1 worse. So ballistic skill 4+ becomes ballistic skill 5+ when you're shooting a Basilisk indirectly. This means that if you're shooting a Basilisk at a unit you can't see, and there's a bit of dense terrain in between you, or the enemy has some kind of -1 to hit modifier inbuilt or via stratagem, your Basilisk will actually only be hitting on 6s. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, but Mordian Glory, I've watched some of your other unit reviews, and you said that field orders batteries were alright. You said they were definitely usable, and you also said that mortars were really, really, really good, and they fight indirectly. They're going to be affected by this nerf, so how come they get a pass and the Basilisk doesn't? Very simply, because those units can receive infantry orders, and the Basilisk cannot. Those units can receive take aim. This order gives you +1 to hit, and it gives you +1 AP, essentially completely negating the indirect fire nerf. But unfortunately, the Basilisk doesn't have access to this. Therefore, it's going to be hitting on 5s at best. And the moment you come across one of those many -1 to hit modifiers in the game, dense terrain, smoke screen, or just an inbuilt ability that a unit has, damn you Trixie Eldar, this thing goes down to hitting on 6s. Now, considering that it's got a reliable number of shots, on average it's going to be firing 6 or 7 times. What this means is that you're essentially paying 140 points for an average of 5 hits over the course of a game. Even if every single one of those hits then wounds and the enemy then fails their saves, that is just enough damage to kill a Rhino. That is just enough damage to wipe out a single 5-man Space Marine squad. That is not worth a 140 point investment on your end. And that's assuming that everything goes your way. More than likely, what will happen is at least half of the shots that you fire that you hit with, I should say, aren't going to do anything. So you could be spending 140 points to kill 2 or 3 Space Marines over the course of a game, taking half the wounds off a Rhino, maybe if you're lucky. It's just not worth it in any way, shape, or form. And so, rather unsurprisingly, I am going to give the Basilisk a pretty low score. Now, you might be surprised, but I am going to give it a 3 out of 10. I bet a lot of you thought I was going to give it a 1 out of 10. Well, there's a simple reason why it doesn't get that. It's still indirect fire. And I've said this once, and I will say it 100 times. Indirect fire is unbelievably valuable in games of 40k. You should not be going into a game without some form of indirect fire or brutal close combat ability where you can just charge through ruins, or pseudo indirect fire where you can drop down deep strike. You need ways of getting angles on your opponent. You need ways of targeting units he doesn't want you to target. And so simply by having indirect fire, the Basilisk will avoid getting a minimum 0 out of 10, a minimum 1 out of 10. All right. Basically, if you have no other form of indirect fire in your collection, you still want to be including a Basilisk. Even if it's just 1 or 2 of them, you still want them. That's how important indirect fire is. But the moment you have anything else, even if it's just a single squad of mortars, swap that Basilisk straight out. It still fills a niche. It's just the worst possible unit for filling that niche. But all of this is just like my opinion, man. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. If you enjoyed today's video, then please make sure you smash that like button and also subscribe to never miss an episode. And if you want to go the extra mile and support the channel and see more content like this, then please consider becoming a channel member or patron. One of the big perks you get for being a supporter is you gain access to the Mordian Glory Discord server, an online community with almost 1,500 active members. It's always popping off in the MG Discord, and we've got channels for painting, hobbying, army list, tactics, and even a pretty spicy meme section as well. And I'd just like to take a moment to say a big thank you to all of the latest channel members. So a huge thank you to Major Problems, Red Bear 27, Axion, Kevin Goodrich, Templar, Carl Brand, Andrew Johnson, Cop 180, and Branagh Lair. Thank you guys for doing your part. I also want to give a shout out to the latest Patreons as well. So a big thank you to Bad Bet, Percy McDonald, Kevin Goodrich, Proxy Nevada, Jonah Payne, Christian Bashoff, OCDM, and Zar. Thank you guys for being Patreon supporters. And last but certainly not least, I would like to say a personal, heartfelt, and a special thank you to all of my top tier Patreon supporters. These are the War Masters, the people who have truly gone above and beyond the call of duty. So I want to say a huge thank you to Alan Blunt III, Bon Bon Vert, Mark Panconi, Ross Miller, Swordfish Trombone, John Stubbs, Diesel Fox, August Varney, and Absolute Rubbish. Thank you guys. Your ongoing and incredibly generous support makes a huge difference. I hope you all enjoyed today's video. Thank you for watching, and of course, as always, I'll see you guys next time.